In my comparative study, I will be analyzing Hayao Miyazaki's 1997 film Princess Mononoke as well as James Cameron's 2009 film Avatar. Through looking at them from the lens of post-colonialism, I intend to show how the differing cultural contexts of the filmmakers affected their portrayal of colonialism. The reason I believe it is justifiable to compare these two films has to do with the extremely different cultures in Japan and America, which are heavily influenced by the majority religions of their nations. Alongside both nations having a complicated history with colonialism, we should see a very complex and distinct view of colonialism based on the cultural context in which these films were made. Post-colonial theory, in general, attempts to criticize the horrors and effects of colonialism, as well as looking at the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. I intend to focus on looking at how these directors portray colonialism and how they portray the way in which colonialism affects those forced under its grasp. While both Avatar and Princess Mononoke do have vaguely critical views of colonialism, the way in which they represent the complexity of colonialism is truly what separates the two films. Princess Mononoke follows the story of a young boy, Ashitaka, who is cast out to solve a curse he is suffering from, and along the way he becomes entangled in a conflict between the settlement of Irontown and the animals outside its walls. As the conflict progresses, slowly the decline of both the animals in Irontown becomes more apparent, and as the film ends, the killing of the forest spirit leaves both the human and animal world ravaged. Avatar, on the other hand, follows the story of a crippled marine sent to a different planet as he is tasked with the job of infiltrating the society of native aliens living on the planet.
Look, Sully, I want you to learn these savages from the inside. I want you to gain their trust. I need to know how to force their cooperation or hammer them hard if they won't.
As he becomes closer with the native peoples, the Na'vi, he begins to change allegiances, and the conclusion results in the Na'vi kicking out all the humans, save for a few. One commonality between these films is their representation of the struggle against an oppressive force. This is quite common in films dealing with colonial themes, as it gives a simplified version of conflicts between colonial powers and native peoples. Specifically, this gives a relatively accurate representation of the colonization of the Americas throughout the many centuries it took. Despite this narrative similarity, though, the way in which this struggle is represented is extremely different when comparing the two films. Specifically, it helps to show the difference between how the directors portray the effects of colonialism. In Avatar, Cameron creates a version of this narrative conflict in which the Na'vi are objectively good and the humans are objectively bad, except for a few good individuals.
Keep going, Elmo. These people have to learn that we don't stop. Come on, go.
This, while a simplified look at colonialism, is reflective of the cultural context in which this film was developed, being made in America, a nation strongly influenced by its largest religion, Christianity, whose moral precepts are defined by commandments and proclamations in the Bible, rather than being defined as morally right or wrong by context. What is morally right and what is morally wrong is set in stone. This creates a very strict sense of right and wrong in a nation where even the most fundamental documents outlining laws are based on the powers of an assumedly Christian God. So, even atheists such as Cameron can be largely influenced by the morality put forth by the Christian Church, which is what led to this view of colonialism. And, while Princess Mononoke shares this narrative similarity, there's a larger aspect of complexity to this film. While the audience has shown the main antagonist of the film, Eboshi, doing negative acts, and one of the main characters, San, doing positive acts, the audience is also led to understand that Eboshi is doing good alongside the bad, and that if given the chance, San would do terrible things alongside the good things. Furthermore, when Miyazaki shows San as the center of a scene, he often uses quick montage-like shots where San's face or body fills the entire frame, as well as animating San with aggressive motion and her ominous mask in order to illustrate San's passion, but also to put the audience on edge and make them almost fearful of San. To contrast this, Eboshi is often illustrated in scenes which are still and removed from the characters, involving less movement and making use of medium or long shots. This not only makes the audience feel a sense of calm, but it also helps show off Eboshi's removed, calculated, and cold personality. While Miyazaki could simply present this as a fight between good and evil, he chooses to purposely contrast the narrative actions of the characters with how they are portrayed formally, in order to show how both sides are neither wholly good nor wholly evil. And while it may be tempting to show the colonizers in Irontown as objectively bad and the colonized in the forest as objectively good, this would simply be a false dichotomy. During the rape of Nanking in World War II, the site of many Japanese atrocities, one man saved thousands of Chinese citizens. He was a Nazi. The world does not operate in black and white, rather various shades of gray, and colonialism is not dissimilar. While it certainly is a net negative, to simplify it for any reason is a crime. And yet, the simplification of this topic, was never an option in the mind of Miyazaki, simply due to the context in which he was raised and in which the film was created, being made in Japan, a majority Shinto nation. Shintoism has a very different moral code when compared with a religion such as Christianity. Rather than have firm commandments outlining what to do and what not to do, Shintoism is based on following the will of the kami, spirits which are revered as gods. Due to the way in which the religion is set up and how it defines morality, often in Shintoism we see there are no moral absolutes, and that the morality of any action is defined through the context of that action. So, when presented with a character or action that may resonate with the Western ideas of good or evil, Miyazaki chooses to contextualize that character or action in order to make the audience question whether or not it is right, wrong, or somewhere in between. This lack of clear right and wrong can be extremely uncomfortable to Western audiences, who are so used to clearly defined Christian morals. And this is important, as any film dealing with colonialism should discuss the effects of colonialism, which is often a very uncomfortable subject. Both Avatar and Princess Mononoke attempt to show the negative impact of colonialism through various means. For instance, in Avatar, Cameron shows the slaughter of native people, the forced removal of native people, and the destruction of native people's lands. Cameron chooses to communicate this through a gratuitous focus on the destruction caused by the superior firepower of the humans, focusing on the missiles, home tree collapsing, and the death in droves of native people. Cameron uses the scenes of destruction as a means to focus on the destruction, rather than on the effects of that destruction. This outwardly implies the idolization of the human's ability to kill and destroy, and no matter the narrative attempts to condemn colonization, it is apparent that, formally speaking, Cameron chooses to be complicit in post-colonial mindsets. This, however abhorrent, when contextualized by America's situation as a settler colonial state and colonial power, makes sense. Cameron may be attempting to condemn the colonization of Native American tribes narratively, but formally he appeals to the psyche of the average American citizen, not choosing to challenge their beliefs in any meaningful way. Similarly, in Princess Mononoke, Miyazaki narratively criticizes colonialism, though he also formally criticizes colonialism. This can be seen in the way in which Miyazaki portrays destruction. Unlike Avatar, it is used sparingly, and only to help illustrate the decline of both Irontown and the animals. Oftentimes, Miyazaki chooses to focus on rehabilitation rather than destruction in order to address the effects of colonialism, while also putting emphasis on needing to heal from those effects. For instance, in the scene almost immediately following the death of the forest spirit, while Miyazaki does communicate the destructive effects its killing has caused, the focus of the scene are San and Ashitaka. The focus of the scene is about healing and living.
Nothing is over. The two of us are still alive. Now will you help me, son?
Miyazaki once said, "I do not believe in Shinto, but I do respect it, and I feel that the animism origin of Shinto is rooted deep within me." One of the key components to the ethics of Shintoism is the belief that all people are good and the world itself is good, and being deeply influenced by this belief, which defines the context of Japanese media, politics, and everything in between, it is obvious that Miyazaki is an idealist. Yet, his criticisms of colonialism and the focus on the post-colonial world is grounded in realism. Having spent a long time coming to terms with and learning about Japan's role in the war with China, he has grown to understand colonialism on a deeply personal level, greatly influencing Princess Mononoke and creating this realist view of the world. This complex representation of colonialism and its effects is what leads to this film truly being a masterpiece. The thought-provoking and intricate world crafted by Miyazaki draws the audience in and leaves them with a greater understanding of colonialism. We see both the harm it causes during its tenure as well as the destruction it leaves in its wake. When two societies are put at odds and told to survive, the eventual result will be both of their destructions. And if there is anything Miyazaki intended to be taken away from this film, it was that the effects of colonialism don't end alongside the end of colonialism. Nothing can bring back those who died at the hands of colonialism. Nothing can reverse its destruction. Nothing can simply rewind the exploitative control of a region by an oppressive regime. Nothing will ever be the same, but through recognizing the good in that which is evil and the evil in that which is good, you can move forward, you can heal. You can work to solve the problems of your world. And while Avatar is post-colonial in many of its ideas, in other ways it lags behind Princess Mononoke. The grandiose themes it promised are abandoned in exchange for being a blockbuster hit, and the audience is left with its simplified moral view of the world and half-finished criticism of colonialism. In conclusion, from a post-colonial perspective, Avatar fails to accurately portray the complexities and effects of colonialism, while Princess Mononoke successfully imparts upon the audience a greater understanding of the colonial world, as well as providing a relevant critique of colonial systems and mindsets.